Just like we do every week, we pick an MVP or a team of the week. This week, the LSU Tigers ranked number 7 in the college football playoff rankings, coming off a huge win to number 6 Alabama at home in a overtime thriller. I think everybody knows the story at this point, the 2-point conversion. Mason Taylor, we talked a lot about those freshmen last week that had such a big impact in that game. Now, Drew, I was looking forward to this one. Brian Kelly, the question in the conversation surrounding him coming from South Bend in Notre Dame, how was he going to fit culturally? And I think a lot of that had to do more so with recruiting. So far, so good. The Tigers ranked in the top 5. 14 players out of the 25 commitments that they have currently reside in the top 247. That is 4th in the country behind Notre Dame, coincidentally enough, Georgia, and Alabama. So I think LSU on pace to finish with a very good class here. But Drew, when you take a look at this holistically, what Brian Kelly has done in his first year in Baton Rouge, what are some of your thoughts about LSU's 2023 recruiting class?
I got 2 big takeaways here. The first one is I love what they're doing on the offensive line. We talked about it last week on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel when DJ Chester picked LSU before they even beat Alabama. We love what he brings to the table. We love Zalance Hurd. They got a few other, Tyree Adams, Paul Mapinga out of Georgia. I think this might be the top offensive line class in the SEC and probably the top offensive line class in the country. Now, is that surprising? I mean, if you think about it, not really. Brian Kelly, when he was at Notre Dame, in that during his tenure, he had 3 offensive linemen go in the first round, 3 more go on day 2. So he always puts an emphasis on protecting his quarterback, being able to run the football. So I really like what LSU is doing in the trenches, specifically on the offensive line. And I think they're recruiting nationally, which is a smart play. It wasn't too long ago that the Tigers went 15-0. It were really kind of this darling story. And I think a lot of the teenagers, a lot of these recruits can resonate with that. I mean, look to the NFL right now. You got Joe Burrow, you got Honey Badger, you got Jamar Chase, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, LSU has a national brand. So I know they're always going to focus on the backyard, but I think it makes sense to recruit in California, to get down into Florida, to go up into Steve Wiltfong's backyard and grab a 4-star pass rusher. So that's what I like about LSU's group so far. What about you, Cooper?
I love the approach 1 through 25. And to me, as somebody that used to work in the personnel world, I think what you would try to go out and accomplish when you build your board is you want to have a specific vision for every player. And when you look at Brian Kelly and what he's done in this cycle in 2023, you get the sense and understanding that this is somebody at the helm that understands what he is trying to inject into this program. And it's a flavor of a little bit of everything. You got Deshaun Womack at the top, who I think is the jewel of the class, and almost another guy that could be in that potential 5-star conversation. You talked about the offensive line, what they've done there. Brad Davis has done a tremendous job. I think what they've done in the secondary, and I think the national flavor, Drew, like you talked about it, they went out, they go to California, they get a guy like Dalen Austin, who has continued to ascend in the rankings. Jeremiah Hughes, a really good get. I think they've just been smart about not only who they're recruiting, but where they're recruiting, and not only how that impacts their class in 2023, but if these guys have success, how that is going to continue to impact LSU and their recruiting philosophy in the future. So I think Brian Kelly, his staff, you got to give them a tip of the cap. I think they've been really good. They have focused on Louisiana, the southeast part of the United States, which is essential, but they've also been very calculated, utilizing their relationships in different parts of the country, like St. Louis, like Nevada, like we talked about in Indianapolis, up there as well with Joshua Mickens. So I think they've done a really good job. I'm interested to kind of see if that's something that they're going to continue to do in the future. But Drew, the headliners of this class, we talked about a couple of them already, but I want to start with the 2 wide receivers and a couple guys that have, I guess, kind of caught headlines for us earlier in the process. One guy you're very familiar with in Jaylen Brown, another one very talked about in Louisiana circles, that is Shelton Sampson. But these 2 guys right here, you got to be excited about the trajectory and how they fit in Baton Rouge.
I think Cortez Hankton, the wide receivers coach, is a little underrated, right? With fans, he comes over from Georgia. What's he going to do? How's he going to approach his wide receiver room? And I love what he's got committed. Jaylen Brown, this is a kid I've followed throughout the recruiting process. Remember meeting him as a young 10th grader. Now he's getting ready to enroll early here in 2 months. I was at his game this past Thursday, and the quarterback play isn't great. His QB1 is injured, but Jalen still found ways to impact the game. Caught a quick little slant, went 60 yards for a touchdown. And the thing with him, just like Christopher Johnson, what I was talking about, is speed. I mean, he's a guy who broke Tyquan Thornton's record at a district track meet in the 200-meter dash. Tyquan Thornton, if you don't know who that is, he ran one of the fastest times ever at the NFL Scouting Combine this past spring, going 4.28 on the laser. So he can fly. And I'll say this, Coop, the most encouraging thing I think about Jaylen Brown is he's starting to fill out, add some meat to the bone. And I think that's going to allow him to get a little more comfortable going over the middle. That's been my question about Jaylen Brown. He gets little alligator arms at times, gets a little scared of contact, but he's kind of elevated his play as a senior. I'm super excited to see him out in San Antonio, at the All-American Bowl doing one-on-ones. I think that's a chance for him to shine, potentially move up in our rankings. And I know some people have talked about Jaylen Brown potentially looking at Florida State. Tennessee's been tossed out there. A head coachless Auburn's also been mentioned as a visit destination. But just talking with Jalen's father a few days ago, I think Jalen's as locked in as he has been with LSU, and obviously this season is a big reason why he feels so good about them.
Yeah, I love the speed and playmaking ability that Cortez Hankton and Mike Denbrock have added into the receiver room. You talked a lot about Jaylen Brown, and I really love his ability to stretch the field. I think that's where he's really dynamic, a guy that we have gotten to see throughout the 7-on-7 circuit. I think because of his speed, Drew, you mentioned the frame, but I think the speed allows him access to get on the field early. So I think that's one you're going to keep an eye out on in a very talented and deep LSU receiver room. The other one is Shelton Sampson, homegrown right there from Baton Rouge in Louisiana. I think this is a guy that's a very well-rounded skill set, gives you a little bit of everything, can stretch the field at times, very good 50-50 pass catcher. He's a big target that knows how to use his frame really well and is very sudden in and out of his breaks, knows how to get a free release off the line of scrimmage as well. So I think there's a lot to be happy about there. And Drew, that's not even mentioning Kyle Parker, another guy that has had a very productive senior season out of the state of Texas. So you get three different receivers there. So I like what Cortez Hankton has done. When they talk about building a receiver room, it's almost like a basketball team. You want guys with different skill sets, different sizes that can offer you different values. So I really like the job that Cortez Hankton has done there. Drew, on the defensive side, to me, this is one of the most underrated takes of the cycle, and we've talked about this guy a lot. I think our antennas kind of went way up when we saw this guy in July at Future 50 at IMG Academy, and he dominated this event. But that is Deshaun Womack, who was stuck with the Tigers throughout his commitment and hasn't really wavered at all. But Drew, like I said earlier in the show, I think this is a guy with 5-star potential. He's knocking on the door right now, ranked number 36, and watching his film, I enjoy watching him probably more than any other player in the country, but he's active. He's got a quick first step off the line of scrimmage, very sudden, can bend and can play the edge, but you can really utilize him in a lot of different facets, whether that's in a three-point stance or standing up off the edge. And the guy that I kind of think about, Andrew, and I know me and you were talking about this pre-production, but it's a little bit of kind of B.J. Ojulari more in terms of how he's going to be utilized at the next level. And Matt House, right now, if you're not familiar with him, the first-year defensive coordinator for LSU that came over from the Kansas City Chiefs, he's earning himself quite a reputation with the way he's been able to maximize guys like B.J. Ojulari and Harold Perkins.
Cooper, you can admit it. Deshaun Womack is your recruit crush of the 2023 cycle. We
He's
all got
my guy.
one, and
He's my guy.
I know he's yours. No, the BJ Ojulari comp is great. I think they're going to try to use him in that role because assuming they're going to lose BJ to the NFL draft. He reminds me a little bit of Mykel Williams last cycle. So let's go back. That's a guy that was outside of our 32 in the rankings, and then he gets out to San Antonio at the All-American Bowl, and he rises all the way up into that top 5. He gets to Georgia. Everyone in Athens can't stop talking about Mykel Williams, and as the season has progressed, Mykel has found his way onto the field in one of the most talented defenses ever. So I do really like what we're seeing from Deshaun Womack. I just think he moves so well for such a big frame body. He can be molded into whatever you want. I think he'll probably be a situational pass rusher early on when he arrives in Baton Rouge. Coop, but I think out of everyone in LSU's class, I think he's the one guy that I said, yep, he's avoiding a red shirt and he will play relatively early. And I think you're going to agree with me on that.
Yeah, and the great thing about him, he's still figuring it out. I mean, this was a guy to me that was winning based off of his explosiveness, his ability to go speed to power. But in terms of developing a secondary pass rush move, those are aspects of his game that he needs to continue to develop and will develop once he gets to Baton Rouge. And if you're an LSU fan, I mean, that should only get you more excited that this guy has been as effective as he's been throughout his high school career. And there's still a lot of meat on the bone in terms of his development. But Andrew, let's go to the offensive line now. You talked about it a little bit earlier. This is one of our favorite offensive line hauls in the country, if not our favorite. And it kind of starts up top with a guy from the Peach State, and that is DJ Chester, a recent commit for the Tigers in Brad Davis. And when you think about what LSU's been able to do, I think the key this year for them, and it's been a pleasant surprise, they knew they had 2 really good football players in Will Campbell and Emory Jones, the 2 starting tackles at LSU. But for those guys to be as good as they've been this season, to me, that allows for so much position flexibility down the road when you start talking about guys like DJ Chester, who's now probably allowed to slide into his natural position at guard and cross-train. So Lance Hurd gets to be a little bit more patient in his process as he's developed. Same with Tyree Adams. And then you got Paul Mupinga who's going to kick inside the center. So a lot to like there. I love what LSU has done up front.
You mentioned building out a wide receiver room like a basketball team. I think it's smart to assemble your offensive line room where you can cross-train a bunch of guys. I think when you look at that group, it's a bunch of swing players. And, sometimes you're like, swing player, I don't really like that. Well, look at the NFL. I mean, you can only carry a certain amount of offensive linemen. We're all seeing it right now across college football. You're in, week 10, week 11? I mean, how many offensive lines are completely healthy? You need guys that can play multiple spots, and I love that. We know what they have right now in the 2 bookend tackles, Will Campbell, Emory Jones, and this group behind them. 2-3 years from now, LSU should be set up front. Whoever's playing quarterback, they're not going to have to worry about the blind side. They should be able to generate some push. So this is a great group. I mean, DJ Chester is the headliner for me. He's got a really great throwing profile on the track and field. When he announced on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, he actually told Steve Wiltfong that they're going to let him do that at LSU track and field, and that translates over to football. I mean, put on the film. This is a guy that finds power and he explodes it through his hips as he moves people out of the way. So no, Brad Davis is doing an excellent job. And I said it when we started this whole LSU segment. I mean, Brian Kelly knows what he's doing on the offensive line. So not surprising. That's a strength of this class.
Yeah, and the other guy that doesn't really get talked about a lot is Paul Mupinga from Buford. And this is a guy that I think plays tackle right now, is going to slide inside, play center. I think he's going to be an excellent fit there. You see the way this guy moves, can play at the second level. Kind of reminds me of Lloyd Cushenberry, who played his ball down in Louisiana at LSU, now with the Denver Broncos. So if they can get that type of production, they'll be elated there at LSU. But Drew, one of our favorite parts of this segment, kind of being able to pull the curtain back, give some love to a player that is maybe not stealing as many national headlines. But is there a guy in this class that stands out to you that's maybe not in the top 14, like we talked about, in the top 247 for LSU, that you've kind of done some homework on and say, hey, I think they got something here?
I like Dylan Carpenter, the kid that committed over the weekend, in-state defensive lineman. They flip him from the Ragin' Cajuns. And this is a kid that they worked out, right? So they worked him out in the summer. And really, I think what pushed him that pushed the Tide over and got him in the class is his senior tape. It's excellent. They play him as a Mike linebacker. He also puts his hand in the dirt. I just think that this is a guy that's going to come in, and if he is your fourth or fifth pass rusher, you're going to be in a good spot. I love the twitch on him. 6'3", 241, 10-inch hands, 33-inch arms, 80-inch wingspan, 5.07 in the 40-yard dash. I think this is a great take. And Coop, I always say it, man, like you got to develop your players. And if we're looking at, what college football is right now, the transfer portal's kind of free agency, and then, high school recruiting, that's the NFL draft. And Dylan Carpenter is essentially a day 3 pick, fifth, sixth, seventh round. If you can start hitting on those guys, you're playing with house money. So excited about Dylan Carpenter. Don't think he's going to be a a year 1, year 2 starter, but you look up and all of a sudden, he's making an impact in that defensive line rotation. I would not be surprised.
Listen, the attention is going to be on 1 through 14 in LSU's class, just like we've showed. That's who we're talking about, right? The headliners of this class. But 15 through 25 is going to make the difference, especially on depth. And when you look at LSU this year, they only had 39 scholarship players last year on the roster in the Texas Bowl. So Brian Kelly had to overhaul this roster. And you could say, yeah, they're in the playoff race right now at number 7, and they've done a tremendous job. To me, where they've taken the biggest hit is depth. And where does that show up? On special teams. So when you look at a guy in state like this, who was formerly committed to UL Lafayette, these are the type of guys you get into your program and you let develop. They become quote unquote program players. They have multi-year starter traits and potential, but they're going to need some time to be in a structured program and get to the point where they can be coached up, develop, get in the weight room, and everything they need to do from a nutritional aspect to get up to speed to contribute at a place like LSU. So I really like that take in Dylan Carpenter. Drew, another guy that I really liked, I turned on the tape a couple weeks ago, Christian Brathwaite from Texas, who LSU flipped from Baylor. Dave Aranda, obviously those two are familiar with each other, but I really like this one. This one kind of flew under the radar. This is a guy, a 4-star for us, but he is an incredibly instinctive back. I'm going to talk a little bit later here about Harold Perkins, his impact on LSU's team, but he needs a running mate, especially at the linebacker position. I think LSU is upgrading that position this year. You talk about Brathwaite, and then also Whit Weeks coming in as well, a guy that we like out of the state of Georgia. So I think this guy more physical, instinctive between the tackles. He's got a really good feel and a knack for the football. I think you can line him up off the edge. We talk about that versatility and why it's so important in a Matt House defense. We've seen the way that he's utilized guys like B.J. Ojulari and Harold Perkins this year. That just becomes a lot more harder to game plan for when you got athletes like this that can do a lot of different things. So I thought this was a under-the-radar pickup for the Tigers. I think this is going to be one that serves them well down the road. So, Drew, it's been all love so far, but we got to look at the other side of it as well and take a look and say, hey, is there something that maybe pops up when you're looking at LSU's class that says, hey, this is a little bit of a question mark for me going forward?
I still think they need to add some more in the secondary and that on that defensive side of the ball. They're going to lose a lot. They brought in a lot of what I call mercenaries, 1 or 2 year rentals. They're going to lose a lot of those guys. And, they lead on the crystal ball right now for Desmond Ricks, the cornerback that reclassified from 2024 to 2023. He was just in Baton Rouge. He's going to take official visits in December. He's going to go to Florida. He's going to go to LSU, and he's going to go to Alabama. I think Brian Kelly needs to get this one across the finish line. And if he's able to do that, that will be a huge statement. So Desmond Ricks is one. Javion Tobiano, the other cornerback, that's potentially CB1, CB2, and LSU, good spot for these guys right now with 7 weeks to go before the early signing period. Get the job done, because that's going to make life easier for them in the SEC West.
For me, Drew, I'm going to go to the quarterback room, and people might be saying, what are you talking about? You look at the quarterback room, and it's 3 top 247 guys with Garrett Nussmeier already there, Walker Howard in the boat as well, a freshman redshirting for LSU in Baton Rouge. And then you got Ricky Collins, a guy that I am certainly high on in the top 247 for us. And then another guy, 2024, Joe Sloan, the quarterback's coach, already got his signal caller in that class, and Colin Hurley. But you might be saying, okay, what is the issue with the quarterback room? There's not really an issue, but I look at what LSU has been able to do this year, and to me, they have been very difficult to defend offensively because what Jaden Daniels has been able to give him with his legs when things break down, his ability to extend plays, keep his eyes downfield, and not only what he's doing as a passer, but his ability as a runner. Look no further than what he did against Alabama. Big plays, especially in the clutch late in the game, all off his athletic ability and his ability to improvise. You look at the quarterbacks in LSU's quarterback room for the future. You got guys like Garrett Nussmeier, Walker Howard, who is athletic, but not the athlete Jaden Daniels is. And that's a lot to say. Not a lot of people are. And Ricky Collins, who's also another athletic guy that can get out on the perimeter. And Colin Hurley, who's more of a pocket passer as well. I just think it has been this pleasant marriage that not a lot of people have expected. And this is not traditionally, even dating back to what Brian Kelly had at Notre Dame, the type of quarterback that Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock would recruit. But if I'm those two guys, maybe I'm getting in a room and saying, look, it might help us to have one of these guys in our room at all times, a guy that can improvise, extend plays, be more of a creator in our offense when things break down. So that's one thing. I got that filed away in the back of my head, and maybe that's something they look forward to in the future. But right now, they got a lot of talent coming into that room, but those guys are very, very similar. So just think about that, and we'll see how that kind of unfolds over the next couple of years or so. But Drew, wrapping up, not wrapping up, but getting there. Icing on the top, icing on the cake, I should say. But LSU right now, they're in a really good spot, the number 4 class in the country, and some room to improve. You talked about Desmond Ricks. You talked about Javian Toviano. But there's some other big fish out there that LSU's still in the game for. Is there one guy you got circled that you think could put LSU over the top?
There is, and we need to point this out. Right now LSU is sitting number 4. I've done the math, played around with the 24/7 Sports class calculator. Everyone can do it. Fun exercise. I would encourage it. And LSU actually, I do think, has a chance at the number 1 class. Now they need to get Desmond Ricks, and they would need to get this next guy, Nicholas Harbor, the freak athlete out of Washington, D.C. Coop, you always say this guy slipped out of Area 51. He was my number 1 freak for the class. 10.2 speed. He could run in the Olympics one day. He's expected to take an official visit to LSU at some point in December. That's according to Brian Doan, our colleague. He just was out there at meeting face-to-face with Nicholas Harbor. And I think what's attractive about LSU to Harbor is the fact that they have a good track and field program. He can run there, and I think LSU is one of those programs that's going to let the kid do whatever he wants. Harbor has indicated in the past that maybe he wants to be more of an oversized wide receiver, more of a tight end. I think a lot of schools like him on the defensive side of the ball. I think Pate State, if we need to come up with a name for our own school, we would like him on defense, but LSU, they need help at tight end, so I think they would take Harbor and let him play there. We'll see how this recruitment plays out. I wouldn't count out Maryland for Nicholas Harbor. I think Mike Loxley's pretty good at the buzzer. You also got Michigan in there, South Carolina, Miami fighting. But I wrote storylines heading into signing day today, and that was a big one. What happens with Nicholas Harbor? And LSU is right in the thick of things for him.
Yeah, that would definitely be the one that I think if you're an LSU fan, whether he plays offense or defense, don't get lost in the sauce there. That's just a guy you want to get to campus and figure it out. So Nicholas Harbor, Drew, that would be mine, but that was a really good one you had there. The one for me would be Desmond Ricks. We've talked about this secondary, and they played really well against Alabama, which was really important for them coming off the heels of Tennessee. We saw what happened in that game. But Desmond Ricks is a guy. This is a guy that I said is in the same breath of a guy like Cormani McClain, the number 1 defensive prospect in the class of 2023. Ricks just reclassified from 2024 to 2023. To me, Drew, this really kind of signals the type of guy that LSU has had in the past when they've touted DBU in Baton Rouge, a long reactionary corner, very sticky and man-to-man, the type of guys that NFL evaluators kind of drool over. So I think when you combine a guy like Desmond Ricks, the potential of a Javian Toviano, I think LSU could be very, very dangerous in that third level of their defense if they can lock down a guy like Desmond Ricks. And that would be a big one because we know Nick Saban heavily involved in that one as well. But Drew, as we take a step back and we go to 30,000 feet here, and our final thoughts on LSU, that I think has been a pleasant surprise on the field. They've been a pleasant surprise off the field as well. But some of the things that we brought up in conclusion with LSU, they were really active in the transfer portal last year. The number 3 ranked transfer portal class, according to 24/7 Sports. They took 16 transfers, and they needed it. Like I said, they only had 39 scholarship players. You know, me and you were talking. Is this a trend that you expect to continue right now for LSU?
I mean, this is the question I wanted to ask you, but I would expect Brian Kelly to get back in there. We keep talking about the secondary. They're going to lose some guys, so they're going to have to replenish there. I think tight end's another position. Mason Taylor, we've seen what he has done, but Mike Denbrock, Brian Kelly, I mean, that's kind of their bread and butter, getting tight ends, putting as many of them on the field as you can and trying to find some mismatches. So I think tight end's a position to watch. And then linebacker, right? You were talking about it pre-production. Who's the running mate next to Harold Perkins next year? We think Harold Perkins is 3 and done, but he can't just be the only guy in the middle. You need someone else to play and complement him. So I think that's another position to keep an eye on.
I think they liked Demario Tolan. We saw him get some reps, the freshman from the state of Florida, this past week against Alabama. I think that would kind of be what they would like to see happen, is Demario Tolan kind of grow into that guy as well. But I think they were a little athletically deficient and limited there outside of Harold Perkins. We saw Greg Penn. He looked vulnerable at times against the Crimson Tide. I think they've tried their hands with a couple of other guys as well. Mike Jones Jr. hasn't given them the production that they thought. So I think they have a young nucleus of talent coming in at the second level. But right now, I think they did a really good job. Look no further than their blueprint of what they did last year. I think they felt like they needed to upgrade the competitiveness and the talent of their roster overall, and they did that. So I think they need to do that at the second level. I think they need to do that at every level of their defense. You mentioned losing a guy like Ojulari. I think Harold Perkins is the exception, not the rule, in terms of what he's been able to give LSU this year. I think Deshaun Womack's going to be able to contribute. I like the guys that they have coming in the secondary, but Jarek Bernard Converse has played well. Some of those guys that they've had, Greg Brooks as well, still trying to decide whether or not he's going to stay. Jay Ward more than likely going to be gone. So it looks like until these young guys can come into the program, have a chance to grow and develop and be patient with, looks like LSU is going to continue to kind of patch this up. But Drew, I mean, if you're LSU, what a year for them to be able to market the success that they've had, to say, we've taken 16 transfers and look at the success that they've had, even starting with the quarterback position in Jane Daniels. And we're going to have to wait and see whether he leaves or not. But Drew, I'm going to finish with this tight end position. If something were to happen to Mason Taylor at any point this season, they would have been in a pinch. You know, Cole Taylor is not that inline Y physical type of tight end. We talked about Mason Taylor's skill set, being able to bang inside, flex out. Outside of that, they really don't have much. And Mac Markway coming in, the 4-star prospect per 24/7 Sports, he's been banged up a little bit. So I would expect LSU, that is a critical position for them. I like what they have coming their way, but I think they got to go out and find another able and serviceable body, which is not an easy task to do at that position. And Drew, the last thought with LSU, the guy that we have mentioned a lot here that has been a home run hire for LSU, but that is Matt House, formerly of the Kansas City Chiefs. He actually, not actually, but is a guy that had a lot of college football experience. But I expect him, I think that's fair, to be a very hot name in NFL coaching circles as a potential defensive coordinator. And with the turnover that we've already seen at the Sunday level already, I think you got to expect that if you're Brian Kelly. We kind of saw this last year with Michigan, and Big McDonald had a year at Michigan. Michigan played well. They had a college football playoff run. And then he's back to Baltimore with brother John Harbaugh. So Matt House, I'm keeping my eye on that if I'm Brian Kelly.
Absolutely. I think it's something to talk about. I mean, we're getting closer and closer. Silly season also encompasses the coaching carousel and how wild it can get. And I don't think Matt House is the key to some of these recruitments, but he is the key to the X and O's, and that would be a blow for LSU. But Brian Kelly, he's a veteran coach. People want to work for veteran coaches, so I'm sure he'll be just fine. Someone's going to want to coach up Deshaun Womack and Harold Perkins next season. I'll sign up if they need someone to do that.
The boys are nerding out when we're talking about, potential NFL destination coordinator jobs for Matt House. So that's the time of the year. That's what we love to do. The Oyster Boys bringing it as always.